Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Band 47. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin, and I am glad you are here. Fun show for you guys today. I'm joined by fellow staff writer Mike Rodak. And Mike, I'm curious, would you like to be called staff writer, or would you like to be called associate head staff writer, or assistant head staff writer, or even head staff writer? Like, what would you like your official title to be?
Yeah, there's definitely some titles out there. I've always liked the senior. I don't know. I've never felt old enough to have a senior title, but maybe one of these days you can be a senior something. It makes you feel old. I don't know, like a senior citizen. But I know what you're getting at.
Associate staff writer, Mike Rodak.
Right, deputy, senior, vice president of whatever. There's certainly places that love titles. I don't know if we are one particularly ourselves, but I get what you're getting at, which is this new Alabama staff is definitely a little bit title heavy. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's there's definitely a few more extra titles than what we saw in the Nick Saban era.
That is why I'm cracking these jokes to kick off today's show. Alabama's slowly starting to roll out its official coaching staff announcements, and it seems like every position has come with multiple titles, right? Freddie Roach and Robert Gillespie were kind of the first ones announced. They got promotions. Freddie Roach, defensive line coach, as well as associate head coach. Robert Gillespie is the running backs coach, as well as assistant head coach. Kane Womack was announced as the defensive coordinator, inside linebackers coach. That's pretty easy. Same with Nick Sheridan, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. Very simple. But then Jamarcus Shepard followed Kalen DeBoer from Washington to Alabama. He's both the receivers coach, the co-offensive coordinator, and the assistant head coach. Mike, help me make sense of all these titles, because there's a lot of assistant head coaches and associate head coaches. And if we're going to believe the people that were kind of announcing the coaching hires over the last month or so, I feel like there's going to be co-defensive coordinators coming, maybe a few more assistant head coaches that are going to be announced. Maybe, later this week, maybe even while we're recording. Like, what's with the titles? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's somewhat of a new school thing. I mean, they've been around for a while, but I think you see more coaches these days paying attention a little bit more to that. Whereas some of the old school coaches were just, you're the secondary coach, you're the D-line coach, you're whatever. And that's probably where Nick Saban, that's kind of what he was raised in football wise. And again, he kind of a shared background with Bill Belichick, and I covered the Patriots with Bill Belichick, and titles were not important. Like, he didn't even have an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator some years. And I can assure you there was no anything, or there was an assistant head coach, but it wasn't, it was just do your job. Doesn't really matter what your title is. And I think to some extent, Nick Saban, is part of that era as well. Because we didn't really see a whole lot of that when he was here. There was co-defensive coordinators in 2018 with Tosh Lupoy and Pete Golding. That was kind of you had two guys and they're almost competing, like feeling out which one would be the play caller, and Pete Golding eventually won and became the the play caller the next year officially. So other than that, I think Holman Wiggins got assistant head coach of offense at one point. And a lot of that is pay related. It's probably comes with an increase in salary. I'm sure in a lot of cases comes with some sort of other offer that they're getting elsewhere, and you're trying to compete with that. And it's important to some coaches. And the same thing in New England, where now Gerard Mayo is the coach, and he says titles are important, and that does mean something to people. And we've seen more of them up there, and now we see more titles with the new coaching staff at Alabama. And there's an associate head coach in Freddie Roach. There's two assistant head coaches in Jamarcus Shepard and Robert Gillespie. There's an offensive coordinator. There's a co-offensive coordinator in Shepard. There's a defensive coordinator in Kane Womack. There's two co-defensive coordinators in Maurice Linguist and Colin Hitchler. And I don't know, maybe there'll be another one if Christian Robinson gets that title too. So I don't know if it really means anything operationally. Like, I don't think Jamarcus Shepard, is not really going to be involved in calling plays. I think that's going to be Nick Sheridan's area, with, I'm sure, a lot of input from Kalen DeBoer, and defensively Kane Womack's going to be calling plays. And it's more just honorary title, but I think it again means something. It probably means something from a pay standpoint, and we'll see that, once the contracts get approved from the trustees. But it's a change, and it's slightly more annoying, I guess, to type it all out when we name some of these guys. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I figured pay probably had something to do with it because I was listening to, I think it was an interview with Jed Fish, who took over at Washington after DeBoer left. And he said one of the many reasons he actually left Arizona, because it was not something that he was planning on doing, was that Washington had a larger assistant coaching pay pool. And so he had the opportunity to bring all his assistants with him, or at least most of them, and pay them a little bit more than what they would have been paid at Arizona. So I wonder, just kind of doing the math here, like Alabama's probably got a larger assistant coaching pool or analyst pool or whatever the case may be to pay some of these assistants. And so I wonder if DeBoer, the guys that followed him, the guys that stayed, hey, here's a little extra money to, thank you for your hard work, to, appreciate you sticking around, especially in the case of, Gillespie and Roach, like two holdovers from Saban's last staff, really kind of helped keep majority of the roster together. And also, they coach running backs and defensive line. Not really any defections from those two position groups specifically. So like, hey, appreciate your help. Here's an extra title. Here's an extra pay bump. That was honestly the first thing that came to my mind. But I agree. It's a little silly. Just trying to keep track of everything. And like, I wonder if that's not one of the first questions, but like if we have time this spring, like, hey, can you explain some of the titles to us and what it all means and why you did what you did, DeBoer? Like, obviously not at the top of our list in terms of pressing stuff to talk about, but yeah, like it's a mouthful every single time.
Right. And, half their staff is a co-coordinator, which I guess every assistant coach in a way is a co-coordinator. I mean, it's, you're involved in leading the offense. You're involved in leading the defense. Like that's functionally, it's probably always been the case. It's just not honored with a title, or it hasn't been honored with a title until now. So yeah, it is what it is. It's one of those small things that I'm sure we're going to see a lot of little things over the months and the years to come that will be different than what we're used to under Nick Saban. I don't think that means it's better or worse. It's just different. And it's one of those things that I think we're going to have to get used to.
Yeah, which is, change it's kind of exciting, like I know that a lot of people are going to miss Saban, and he obviously had the most legendary run in terms of college football history, but new sheriff in town, bringing a lot of old buddies and new faces. And like you said, things are going to be different. And, hopefully Alabama fans embrace it, because obviously this guy's had a lot of success wherever he's been, and I have no reason to doubt that he's going to do the same thing in Tuscaloosa. Speaking of the staff, again, we think the staff is finalized. Earlier this week had a few more final coaching moves. After Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff moved on to the NFL Seattle Seahawks, Nick Sheridan officially promoted to offensive coordinator. DeBoer also went out and hired Brian Ellis, who was Georgia Southern's offensive coordinator. He's now the new tight ends coach, which is what Sheridan was initially expected to be. DeBoer also plucked two Baylor assistants, Chris Kapilovich, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm just going to call him Coach Cap, to coach the offensive line. And then Christian Robinson coached the outside linebackers. Cap fills the role vacated by Huff. Robinson fills the role vacated by William Inge, who we learned earlier, not actually joining Alabama staff and actually instead going to Tennessee, where, hey, he also got a new fancy title, right? Co-defensive coordinator. We think that's the staff. Do we have initial thoughts on the hires, the movement, the staff as a whole?
Right. It's a really wide ranging staff. Like it's not Washington staff to a large degree. I mean, there's obviously, Inge we thought was coming. And there was even a time I thought Chuck Morrell was coming, who was, the defensive coordinator in Washington, and really none of the defensive staff from Washington was coming. Obviously DeBoer tried to bring Grubb and Scott Huff along, and just it didn't happen. It didn't work. It would have been short lived anyway. I think that's something even Ryan mentioned. The Austin Mack's family, I remember reading. I apologize if it was on our side or somewhere else. I just remember the quote where Grubb was telling Austin Mack that if I'm not gone now, I might be gone later. Like it's just part of the deal with him. He's a sought after coach. So Yeah, I don't think that's the end of the world losing Ryan Grubb. But the point is, like, you're only bringing along Sheridan and Jamarcus Shepard. And I'm not even sure of how many analysts that are coming along from Washington either. I think I've seen a few of them go elsewhere. I know one of his analysts at Washington, Tyler Hughes, just got hired by the Patriots, actually, going back there. He had been there previously and is going to be their wide receivers coach. So overall, in terms of like carryover from Washington, it's not a ton. In fact, it's, I'd say, a lot less than what you normally see with a coach who's changing jobs. But with that, it's a lot of guys being pulled in from different directions. I mean, you have Roach and Gillespie who have been here. You know, they've been in the SEC. You have the Washington guys. You have, Mo Linguist, who's from Buffalo, as their former head coach, has some experience elsewhere. Colin Hitchler, some experience, Cincinnati, Wisconsin. You have Christian Robinson coming in, who's been around the SEC a little bit. He's a fairly young coach, but he's been at a few stops there. And Kapilovic, I'll get that one down. I just double checked the pronunciation. That is what it is.
Coach Cap,
who's been around, but not really in the SEC. And
right.
And then Brian Ellis, who's really worked for one of the Helton brothers or the Helton father really his entire career.
Yeah.
So a lot of these guys haven't worked together. I mean, there's a little bit of carryover at Western Kentucky when Jamarcus Shepard was there with Nick Sheridan, I believe it was. There's obviously Sheridan was at Indiana. There's a couple guys that were together. Womack and Hitchler were together for a year at South Alabama. But for the most part, these guys have never worked together. And that's a little bit unique to have that many new faces on a coaching staff and trying to get everybody on the same page with terminology and culture and system and all of that. To me, it seems like you got to give that some time. Like, to expect all of that to just go out in the practice field on March 4th and have everybody on the same page and know what they're doing when it's new to the coaches, it's new to the players, and the coaches are new to each other. The players are new to the coaches. Like, it may not look very pretty right away. And that could extend all the way into August, could extend extend to the spring game when we see them on the field publicly. It could extend through August, could extend through September, October, further. Like, the expectations for this season with all the changes that have taken place should be somewhat tempered from what we're used to under Nick Saban. Like, it has to be, because what it was under Nick Saban was a well-oiled machine that was out recruiting everybody every year, had the best coach in the country, had probably the best players in the country. And this is not bad by any means compared to that, but it's still not what that was. So, talking third, fourth, fifth place finish in the SEC, like, that could be where this team is. And that's perfectly fine. Like, people should not freak out if that's what happens this fall. But I think everybody's just looking for progress. Like, you talk about chemistry, you talk about gelling, you talk about coming together. Like, that's what people want to see. They want to see something that ascends, even if it doesn't look pretty right away.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It's going to take time. And you wrote something really well earlier this week just about how patience is going to be required within the staff, within the fan base, because of all the points that you just mentioned, that a lot of these guys, some of these guys have worked together before, which I think is going to give them a good foundation, but a lot of these guys also haven't. I think there's a lot to like about the combination of this staff and this roster, right? A lot of these coaches have worn different hats, 2 former sitting head coaches, a couple of former sitting coordinators, that are now going to be more positional coaches. It's just, I know DeBoer and his media car wash over the last couple of weeks has basically said, like, yeah, like, it's good to have all those different minds in the room, because he's going to bounce a lot of different ideas off these guys and he wants to hear what they have to say. And a lot of these guys have just been through different experiences. So, that's just going to, you hope that it gels in a way that's obviously going to push the whole operation forward. I think one thing that's really interesting to me, or at least I thought it was interesting, is that, DeBoer as a head coach, sometimes it starts a little rocky, but generally speaking, he figures things out pretty quick. And when he figures things out, things look very, very good, right? When he was at Fresno State, first year was 2020. So the COVID shortened season, they went 3-3. The next year, 2021, they went 9-3. So then gets to Washington 2022, their first 6 games, he goes 4-2. Good, not great. Then they went 21-1 over their next 2 seasons, right? So like there's a documented history of this guy figuring it out. Like, did he have continuity of his staff between Fresno and Washington? Yes. So the fact that Ryan Grubb is off to Washington now, like, a lot of debate on our board, is it Grubb's offense? Is it DeBoer's offense? Right. Like, I think you'd prefer to have them both, but me personally, I like DeBoer's documented history as an offensive coordinator, as a play caller to, be able to have success before and after Grubb. Again, you'd prefer to have them both, but the fact that Alabama still has DeBoer, I think that's a good thing moving forward. And the other thing too is like the players, it's going to take time for them to figure out, a lot of these players, especially the 2024 signing class, they committed to Saban, right? Like they were expecting Saban, they were expecting his assistants. Kudos to DeBoer and his staff for getting a lot of these guys to stick around. But it's going to take some time to figure out, like, hey, like this is, what does this coach need from me? How does their coaching style, how do they respond to certain coaching styles? How do the coaches try to get the best out of the athletes, right? That's another hallmark of DeBoer. Like he's routinely done more with less. Now he's got the most talented roster he's probably ever had. I don't know. Like I think there's a high ceiling here, but I think I don't know if it's a warning, but like your insistence on patience from all parties involved, I think is really smart. And I hope people take heed to that because yeah, like it might look rocky in the spring and it might look rocky at the beginning of next season because, hey, they got to go do Wisconsin, who's competent. They host Georgia in September, right? They still, they got to go through the SEC grind. Are a lot of these things going to translate? We don't know yet. And that's, I think, what's going to make next season super, super intriguing. I mean, it was already going to be intriguing because Saban's not there, but just to see if all these things can translate. In addition to, like you said, can they build a foundation quickly and can they show progress? There's a history that says they will, but it's the SEC. Kind of have to see it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's these next 6 weeks too are going to be really important for not only for spring practice to start to come together in the field, but DeBoer is still going to have to sell his program to players over the next 6 weeks because they're not out of the woods with the portal. Like there's still the opportunity for players to leave. And quite frankly, it would be as we've talked about before, a little bit of an easier, cleaner move to do it, to enter the portal in the summer academically to go somewhere else as it would have been for players who all of a sudden had to do it, the second or third week of January. Some players still did, but you're already starting the semester and it's easier to do it in the summer. So there's going to need to be a sales job that happens that, especially for the players that might have high expectations or maybe already had high expectations for their potential roles, under the Saban administration. And then DeBoer comes in and they say, hey, maybe this schematic change helps me out. And I might even have a better opportunity. Well, you go out there in spring practice and you're on the third team and you're not getting any reps and you're saying, why am I here? And that's what happens to a lot of guys. And then a lot of guys leave. So you're going to need to, figure out how to message those guys and say that you need to stay around, or, it could even be the other way around. Like you could, as a coaching staff, go out there and say, we think player X is a good fit for our system, but we've seen him practice for 15 days and we're like, he might not be a good fit. And maybe we need to go find someone else to fill that role. So it goes both ways. And that window, April 16th to the 30th, I think is still going to be active for Alabama, both coming and going through the portal. But, the other point that I wanted to make too, is that I think you have to be nimble if you're Kalen DeBoer. And I know like Nick Saban had his way, like it was his playbook, offensive, defensive, his system, iron fist. He had the cachet to do that. He was coming into Alabama, even as a national champion from LSU. DeBoer has been successful, but he's not what Saban was coming into Alabama. And you still have to be flexible. And you think even this year on the basketball side, Nate Oates brings in a former head coach, or really a sitting head coach in Austin Claunch, brings in an NBA assistant in Ryan Pannone, brings in Preston Murphy. And everybody's saying how great of a staff it was because you have pretty accomplished guys. And then a couple weeks ago, Nate was talking about how he had to change the roles for all these guys halfway through the season because it wasn't working what they were doing the first couple months. And they had Pannone go to the other side of the ball and stuff like that. And you have to be nimble. Like you may think that you have this great staff, and they very, very well have that, but you don't know how it's all going to work out in actuality. And if certain roles or um, pieces of what you're trying to do aren't working, then Kalen DeBoer, I think, is going to have to, figure out a plan B and not just be completely stuck in his ways. I don't think he will be either, but I think that's going to be important in year one is just feeling everything out. So again, it all goes back to you're going to be playing Georgia on September 28th, and Georgia has their stuff figured out. They've been doing it a certain way for a certain number of years now. They have the players for it. They have the quarterback for it. And to go up against that, even though it's going to be in Tuscaloosa, is going to be a huge, huge challenge for where this Alabama program is right now. So I'm not saying they're going to lose. I'm not saying it's going to be bad, but like it's going to be tough. And that's going to be a huge, and this term is overused in sports, but measuring stick sort of game that between now and September, and that's only, I can't do math, 7 months away, that's, the clock's ticking on that right now.
All good points. All good points. Wanted to move forward with a couple of transfer additions for Alabama this week. One high profile guy, at least I think we all agree it's higher profile guy in Keon Sabb, safety from Michigan. Played in 13 games last year, 14 games. Obviously was pretty critical in Michigan winning a national championship. Also got a commitment from Washington tight end Josh Cuevas. I think Sabb is probably the bigger name, just maybe given one, where he's coming from, and then two, the role that he's going to fill, right? Safety, the secondary for Alabama. I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of guys to figure out roles, for the young guys to get playing time. That could be a potential portal position target, whether it's a safety or a cornerback come April. What did we think initially about the addition of Keon Sabb? It seems like this seems like a really good pickup just because of the position that he plays and the experience that he's going to bring to that room.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the main benefit of the move is experience, high level playing experience in the Big Ten and the college football playoff. He's not, you're not having to make that assumption that he's a group of five player or an FCS player that's going to be going to a larger school or a larger conference. Like you already have seen him on tape playing against good teams, including Alabama. He played a little bit in the Rose Bowl. So you have some base of knowledge there about what he can bring. So that certainly helps. I think it's, like we said, it's a position where they needed some help because of Caleb Downs leaving. I don't think he's a 1-for-1 replacement for Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs is a very rare player that Alabama certainly would have loved to have back. Let's make no mistake on that. I don't think they've upgraded. Like that's, nobody can in their right mind say that. But it's better probably than going from Caleb Downs to, Devontae Smith, who hasn't really played on defense through his first 4 years. Sabb's played more than Devontae Smith has. That probably would have been a guy I would pencil in as a starter before the Sabb move. Better than, we'll have to see where they put Malachi Moore and what exactly they want to do with him. And he could move around. Like, I don't think anything's going to be set in stone right now, but if he's in the slot, then you really need two starting safeties. If he's at starting safety, then, you don't really need that as much. So we'll have to see how that works. But, this Womack defense, is going to use some safeties. And, I think Sabb's a guy who's a little bit bigger, can play closer to the line of scrimmage. I know Andrew Ivins compared him to Kyle Duggar in New England, who's kind of that player who's
it's a good comparison.
Yeah, hybrid linebacker, safety type. So, that it's something they needed. So you filled the position of need. But I think, as usual, you do have to be careful to, as fans, overrate players who are in the portal, especially during a quiet time. And I remember, the same thing probably happened with Tyler Harrell a couple years ago when he was coming from Louisville. and everybody's like, oh, this is a great receiver who's in the portal, who's really fast. And everybody's looking at the couple of catches that he had for 70 or 80 yards at Louisville. And sometimes when a player is kind of out in the open right there, and he's the only player who's on the market, you tend to lift him up on a pedestal. And Sab going into the portal as late as he has and really being alone out there right now in terms of like power 5 players that were in the portal the last couple weeks, like there's a tendency maybe to elevate that as if like he had come out right after the Rose Bowl. He probably wouldn't have got quite as much attention because he wasn't really a true starter at Michigan. So, you know, you do have to be careful with overrating players just from that standpoint. But, you know, Courtney Morgan's been around him. He's, you know, recruited him at Michigan. You know, certainly has a good understanding of him. So again, I think the floor on him is pretty high because you're not projecting him to a higher level. You've been around him before as a person. You kind of know who he is. It's just a question for me is where's the ceiling? You know, how good of a player can Keon Sabb be if he's playing 16? I'm thinking the NFL right now. How many games would you play maximum now with the 12-team playoff?
If you had a first round game, so that's 13 plus 4, 17 games?
17 games, yeah. So it's the same as the NFL. If you're starting Keon Sabb for 17 games, well, A, it means you made the national championship game, but like, how good is that defense? Like, is that a guy that can bring you that level of play to get you there? I guess is what I'm getting at. Like,
yeah.
Or is he more of a role player that you don't want to be playing and exposing all that much? That's going to be the question. So again, in year one, where you don't have a better option because you lost Downs and maybe Xavier Mincy is not quite ready to start yet, by all means, like he could be your best option right now.
Yeah, no. And I think just base value, like he seemed, you know, 6'1", 210 about. So a little bit bigger for a safety just in terms of, you know, the size and, you know, thumping ability that he's probably going to bring. He seemed like, you know, I think he's got a lot of versatility because he's pretty good in coverage just based on everything that I've seen. Surefire tackler, doesn't really miss a whole lot. You know, you could kind of put him in that star type position. You know, I know Womack's going to bring a 4.25 and, you know, they're going to have kind of a roving star slot guy that, you know, like you mentioned, could probably play a little bit more in the box. This could be that guy just because he brings that level of versatility. You could also back him up to strong safety a little bit and have Malachi Moore just because he's been there, done that for, you know, this will be what, his 5th year. He also brings that type of versatility. I think just having 2 guys who can do a lot of stuff in a secondary that needs guys like period, but also needs guys that can do a lot of stuff. I don't think that you can go wrong. Like you mentioned, how it bears out, what it looks like, where he plays remains to be seen. That's actually one of the many things I'm very intrigued about this spring. Just what's the secondary going to look like? How much are the young guys, like how much run are the young guys going to get? That's going to be very, very interesting to me. But I like this pickup just from a versatility standpoint. This is a guy that can do a lot of stuff. And in a Womack defense, in a 4-2-5 defense that you need to apply pressure consistently, and you need a pretty athletic secondary on the back end, this seems like a natural fit. Where he fits, no idea, but it's a good puzzle piece to have.
Yeah, and you know, I'm trying to look up a little bit too how much single high safety they played at South Alabama with Womack. And you know, Saban, I think for the most part, is going to play 2 high safeties like that. Seemed to be the way to go. Do we see more single high looks, you know, with the 4-2-5? I'm not smart enough to know exactly how that all shakes out, but
kind of depends. I don't know.
And you know, who would play that center field role, I think is also a question I would have, because I don't know if Malachi Moore, you know, do you want him covering 50 yards left to right? Like, is that what he is as a player? I don't know. I don't, you know, I haven't really, the Xavier Mincy's and some of the younger guys, I don't know exactly how they would fit that role yet. So that's a question I think they would need to answer if they want to go that way. I think you can still play a 4-2-5 and have 2 high safeties. You know, you're probably going to be a little bit lighter against the run. So we'll have to see how all that shakes out. But it's, again, like you said, you have different pieces that can probably do different things. I just don't know if you have that one like obvious center field type safety coverage type of guy that you know, really stands out to me right now.
Yeah. Second guy that they picked up through the portal, Josh Cuevas, who was tight end 3 for Washington last year. These stats are hilarious. Ready for this? 4 catches for 164 yards and 1 touchdown. If you look at his game log, he had 1 catch against what is it? Week 1.
Boise State.
Yeah, 1 catch against Boise State, 1 catch against Michigan State, 1 catch against Arizona, 1 catch against Southern Cal. 2 of his catches went for exactly 57 yards.
70-yarder, I think, against Arizona, right?
No, it says 57 yards.
57? Interesting. Okay.
Interesting pickup just because of, Amari Niblack goes to Texas through the portal, so they've got space for a tight end. I know they're bringing in 2 tight ends through the signing class in Jay Lindsey and Caleb Odom. Seems like there's some smoke around Caleb Odom potentially being a receiver, which personally, I think that'd be kind of fun. That's what he played in high school. And also he's 6'5", 215 before he gets into a college weight room. Like, hello, Mike Evans Jr. Like, that looks like fun, especially in DeBoer's offense. Because you look at some of the receivers, Roma Dunze, pretty big dude, right? Like 6'3", 215 or so. Neither here nor there, but this seems like, on the surface, obviously the guy has got big play potential, but also he has spent a year in DeBoer's offense, and he's going to be able to bring that experience, not just to the tight end room, but also I think just to the pass catchers in general. That in itself looks like a pretty big win, even if this guy didn't play a ton last year.
Yeah, it kind of gives you that bigger, I don't say he's an outside receiver, but I don't want to say he's Travis Kelce either, but you could put like a big guy in the slot and have him move around a little bit.
Cuevas is 6'3", 240.
Oh, sorry. I'm talking about Odom. I don't
okay.
know about Cuevas first. I'll start with Odom because I think honestly he might be the bigger player, the bigger name, as things stand right now to do things. But because you have a little bit of size at receiver, but your top guys coming back are Law, Prentice, Henderson, who are really slot type guys, a little bit smaller. You have Hale, who's a little bit lankier. Bernard comes in, I think he's 6'1". Obviously, Ryan Williams, assuming he gets on the field early, is a potential big guy on the outside. But
if he spends the spring in the weight room, yes, Ryan Williams will see the field. But
right,
he's like 6'1", 165. Like, come on, bro, eat up.
Right. So you probably needed a little bit more size. I think that's what Odom brings. And then if you're moving Odom, it depends on like how they view CJ Dupree. I'm sure they've been watching film on a lot of these guys the last few weeks here and trying to figure out what they have. And, Oots, Danny Lewis played a little bit last year. So it's quite possible they kind of saw a deficiency there in terms of what they wanted to do. And I was the whole DeBoer interview yesterday on Tide 100.9, where he's talking about, I would consider it to have a more pro spread identity, kind of a pro offense with the tight end being a heavy part of that. I thought it was an interesting comment as well, because I don't know if we thought like Washington wasn't very tight end heavy in terms of who their leading pass catchers were last year. They weren't Notre Dame. So I don't know if we saw that necessarily from Washington last year, but maybe that's something they view as a bigger possibility here, especially if they don't have quite what they had at Washington. Add wide receiver right away here. So, to get to Cuevas, like, we'll have to see. Like, he's obviously from a recruiting standpoint, a lower level of the totem pole sort of guy. He was unranked. Went to Cal Poly first and kind of had to earn his way to Washington. And one of those guys that, is the opposite of Caleb Odom. Like, you're talking about a guy who really had to work to get to where he's at in terms of, like, nobody saw it in him. Like, nobody was really offering him. So I don't know, like, what sort of, he's not a huge guy either. He's on the shorter side, I believe.
Cuevas is 6'3", 240.
Yeah, which is not huge. Some tight ends you're looking at 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". So you're not, I don't know if he's like the most athletic specimen. He's not the biggest. He's probably not the fastest. Like,
if the only thing he brings is like experience and knowledge of DeBoer's offense, I think you could still probably chuck that up as a small W.
Right. And he was only at Washington for 1 year. Yeah. Again, had 4 catches. So it's not a ton of experience, but it just kind of helps you fill out your roster. I mean, you've lost Niblack, you lost Miles Kitzelman to Tennessee through the portal. So from a number standpoint, you probably just wanted to have another experienced guy in there. So again, it's a tough guy to really get your arms around because the exposure is so limited on him.
Yeah. I will say this though, like even though Washington kind of ran through Michael Penix Jr. and those three receivers last year, Jack Westover was tight end 1, 46 catches, 430 yards, 4 touchdowns. I know he got a lot of run in the postseason. I watched him in the Pac-12 championship game, the semifinal against Texas, and even a little bit in the national championship game when the offense kind of mostly sputtered, but Westover got a lot of targets. And then they also had Devin Culp. He was tight end 2 for Washington last year, 16 catches, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. So DeBoer wants to use tight ends. So I don't know if Cuevas is going to walk in and be that receiving tight end guy, but it seems like as long as the personnel is there and it makes sense, the tight ends are going to get a little bit more receiving run than maybe they did, in Tommy Rees's iteration of the offense.
Which is funny because we all thought that the tight ends would be a huge part of the Reese offense, and they never.
We were told,
right?
All camp.
And Westover is a similar size to Cuevas, 6'3", 248. You're right. He was third leading receiver, 46 receptions, or the 4th most ever in a season by Washington tight end. 6 catches in the Sugar Bowl, 5 catches against Michigan. So quietly, I guess maybe to me, overshadowed by some of the talent that they had on the outside was
when you got 3 NFL bound receivers. Right.
Yeah. That's when you think of Washington's offense last year, that's the first thing that comes to mind outside of Penix. So, maybe there is more of an opportunity for the tight end. Again, I don't think we're going to see Cole Kmet at Notre Dame type of numbers here, but I don't think Cuevas necessarily be the guy either. Like Cedar Dupree is still a pretty good player. If Robbie Utes can block, he's going to get on the field. So where exactly Cuevas fits in, we'll have to see. But again, you add some spots on your roster. He's a guy that you have seen, him, he's a known quantity, might as well bring him in.
Makes sense to me. Speaking of playoff, one of the last things I wanted to get to on today's show was College Football Playoff Committee formally confirmed the change for the 12-team playoff, which begins next year. They're going to do a 5+7 format. So 5 conference champs, 7 at-large bids under the 12-team format. 4 highest ranked conference champs are going to be seeded 1, 2, 3, 4. They're going to receive first-round buys. Then you're going to have kind of a March Madness style first round, 5 versus 12, 6, 11, 7, 10, 8 versus 9. Those games will be played on college campuses, right? And then the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals will obviously be in bowl game locations. 5+7 makes sense to me, just given how college football has changed over the last couple years. Do you have any immediate or initial thoughts on the change to the playoff?
I think obviously fully expected. I think there was some kind of negotiation type things that were probably going on that led up to this. And again, it goes back to you had a 6+6 format when this was approved last year. The Pac-12 falls apart. You no longer have a 5th power conference that exists to have another automatic bid. So by default, it really would have gone to, and they passed a rule change saying a 2-team conference, if we want to call it that next year, with Washington State and Oregon State, does not get an automatic bid, as anybody can agree would be the case. But if it was still 6+6, that would have been 2 auto bids for group of 5 teams, which is both good and bad. Like, let's say Alabama got an at-large bid and was the 6th seed, then you would have a group of 5 team to play in the first round. And that actually probably would have been a good thing because that would have been an easier win. But overall, the SEC was looking at that and the Big Ten, quite frankly, as it's one less team for us to get into the playoff. It's less money for us. And, so that it made sense, I think, all around to move it to 5 automatic bids. So you're capturing the 4 conference champions from the 4 major conferences, and you're capturing one of the group of 5 teams, which, the SEC and the Big Ten could easily say, you guys don't want to do that? Well, we're going to go start our own playoff because we have 32 teams among us and we can be just like the NFL, and we don't need you guys. And I don't know how, realistic or how close to happening that was. I'm sure that was mentioned, as a negotiation point, but the group of 5 didn't really have to make this change. But if they didn't do it, then what would it mean for any playoff, any spot in the playoff for them going forward. So again, there's kind of some hand wringing that led to this, I'm sure. Yeah, there's still, I think, a lot to be determined about the playoff going forward. I know there's talk that Ross Dellinger's reported about expanding the playoff even further to 16 or whatever. And again, there's still big picture questions on what the SEC and Big Ten do, what the NCAA does with this new subdivision that they're talking about, and how this all looks in 3 or 4 years could still be very different than what we're looking at for just this year. But for just this year, it's 5+7, 5 automatic bids. Top 4 get the top 4 seeds and first round buys. That gives 7 at-large spots. And if you ask me right now, that's probably all 7 of those are SEC and Big Ten teams. I think it would have been last year because you have one ACC team that's probably going to get in. You have one Big 12 team, which would have been Arizona, if you're looking at it the way things will be this year. And then you have a bunch of teams probably like LSU or Ole Miss or, Penn State. Notre Dame could get in as an at-large team outside of a conference. And that's going to be the meat of the new playoff in the first round, those first round games. So, again, expected, not a huge change, but it's something that once we get closer to the season and obviously closer to December, how the 12-team playoff shakes out is going to be a pretty big story.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to follow along and kind of just see how that morphs and shifts over the course of really November and December. To give people an idea of maybe what to expect, here's kind of what the playoff would have looked like this year using the final CFP poll. Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama, all conference champs. They would have been your first round bye recipients. So then you would have had Florida State at 5. Believe they would have probably played Liberty, who went 13-0, 23rd ranked team. They're the highest group of 5 teams. So you got Florida State, Liberty in the first round. Georgia at 6. They would play Ole Miss. I would have liked to have seen maybe them shift a little bit so you didn't have 2 SEC teams playing each other in the first round. But for the sake of this exercise, 6 versus 11, 7 versus 10, Ohio State, Penn State. I feel like you could just swap Ole Miss and Penn State, and that would solve a lot of issues. And then the 8-9 matchup would have been Oregon, Missouri. I think we all know how March Madness brackets work. It would have probably just gone forward from there. I don't know why it took them so long, because that sounds like fun.
Yeah, but I will say it's going to be different from March Madness in the sense that the basketball tournament committee will specifically avoid rematches, conference rematches in the first round. And so there are some kind of artificial tweaks that are made to the bracket to avoid those. That will not be the case with the college football playoff. They will make their final rankings 1 through 25 as they have for the last 10 years and just simply rank the teams as they see them. And from there, though, that's when they slot them into the seedings. And if that means that 2 SEC teams play each other, if that means whoever just played in the SEC championship, well, I take that back because the SEC championship winner would get a first round bye. But let's say Ohio State and Michigan just played each other. Let's say the winner of that game lost the Big Ten championship to Washington, just hypothetically. You could still have Ohio State and Michigan play each other in the first round of the playoff. Like, they're not going to avoid those things artificially if that's what their final rankings have. So those rematches could happen. Absolutely could happen. Or you could have a second round, a quarterfinal rematch of 2 teams that have played each other for the 3rd time.
Like, I don't hate that as much. If they meet in the quarters, like, there's only so much you can do to try to separate these guys. But like, if they meet in the quarters, that's cool. My preference, avoid the first round rematches if possible. I know it's not always possible, but if possible.
And they may say they won't do that.
Yeah.
But, could you artificially change the order of the rankings? And, it could quietly happen, but it's not going to be spelled out for them to have to do that as it is in the basketball tournament. Again, you could have a team that plays 3 times.
Yeah.
Alabama and Georgia play in September. Let's say Alabama and Georgia play again in the SEC championship game. They both get in the playoff. They both meet again in the playoff. That would be a 3rd meeting. That could happen. But I will say the other thing too, in terms of how it would have looked, this past year. You are right in terms of how the conferences were in 2023. The difference is going forward, Michigan and Washington are going to be in the same conference. Texas and Alabama are going to be in the same conference. So only 2 of those teams, even though all 4 of those were conference champions this past year, would be able to win a conference this coming year and get a top 4 seed. And that, I think, is still going to be a point of contention among fans. It could very well be a point of contention among the conferences themselves, where you have such a concentration of power in the SEC and the Big Ten and concentration of quality teams, but you only have 2 out of the first 4 seeds. And you have an ACC winner, let's say it's Florida State next year. You have a Big 12 winner, let's say it's Arizona, that gets a top 4 seed in a first-round bye. And so you could make a very reasonable argument. And again, the final rankings themselves, 1 through 25, might bear this out, that the loser of the SEC championship game or the loser of the Big Ten championship game is a much better team than the winner of the ACC or the winner of the Big 12. But they're going to be seated lower, and you're going to have to play a first-round game, probably at home. I guess theoretically it could be on the road in the first round. And that, in some ways, puts them at a disadvantage. And I don't know what sort of staying power that has. I think there could very well be a day very soon where the SEC or the Big Ten say, we're not doing that. And we're not giving – you could start the negotiation by saying we're not going to take the top 4 teams as automatic bids as conference champions and just rank them however they ranked. But you could take it a step further and say, we're not going to give automatic bids at all. And we're only going to do this with at large. And if there's 8 SEC teams and 8 Big Ten teams that are the best 16 teams or let's say it's 6 and 6, best 12 teams in the country, then so be it. We leave everybody else out.
Woof.
And that could be the negotiation point of the SEC and the Big Ten. And again, you thought that this was settling down. You thought the 12-team playoff would solve some problems, but I don't know. Like I think this is not at an equilibrium yet. And I still feel like this whole setup is pretty temporary.
No, I think that's all good points. And I don't know if it was Dellinger or somebody else, but there's only point that I'll really add to everything that you said is that I feel like it's going to happen in the near future just because the powers that be just have been acting a certain way up to this point. Very real possibility that the SEC and the Big Ten basically take college football as a sport hostage so that they get what they want. And the changes to this sport are far from over. Like it's only a matter of time before the tectonic plates start to shift again. And who knows what it's going to look like 5 years from now, because it looks drastically different from what it did 5 years ago. So yeah, that's all I had to add to that. And that's really all the topics we had for today's show, Mike, unless you got anything else you want to get off your chest.
No, that's it. Glad to do our meeting as usual.
The associate head staff writer, Mike Rodak, always bringing the goods when it comes to college football comings and goings. That's all we've got today, guys. We'll be back probably later this week. Going to talk some hoops. Alabama's got a pretty big slate of games really over the final 5 quad 1 opportunities starting tonight. We recorded this on a Wednesday against Florida. They're going to play Florida twice over the next 5 games. Also got games against Ole Miss, Kentucky, and a rematch with Tennessee. So we'll dive into that a little bit later this week. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. We're still running a special, 30% off annual VIP membership, because we're always running a special. Be sure to take advantage of that, especially if you're a diehard Alabama fan. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to y'all again soon.